this is the Provoked Prawn, and I'm here with some random tips and tricks for Sons of the Forest. Hopefully some interesting things that you don't know already that will be really useful, and if not useful, at least amusing. So you can see here big head mode that I'll get to in a second, for example. But the first one is actually a shout out to the spiffing brick, because it helps you get through various different doorways by using just a stick. Now, he's done a video on this which is pretty entertaining. I'd recommend watching, so I'll link to that in the description. But essentially what you need to do is to use the stick to trick the game into letting you through the door. And you can see that I've just put down some twigs on the other side of the door here, which is obviously not what we're trying to achieve. And I've basically just started a fire on the other side there as well. So now I have a fire in place and set up on the other side. But you'll see that you can basically just clip through the world using just a stick. So if you look at the floor, you'll see that the right mouse button allows you to switch between two different modes, so that you can either create a fire or you can stick a stick in the ground. So you do that, and then what we need to do is basically get close to the door to be able to put the stick on the other side. This is a little bit tricky. When I first tried it, as you can see, I obviously put the sticks down and starting a fire instead. So I'm now lighting a fire on the other side, which might be a bit of a health and safety hazard. But once you've sort of worked out how to do it, you can then push that stick down into the ground on the other side. And then suddenly we've passed through a door, which otherwise we wouldn't be able to get through, locked door. So now we have access to a variety of things, including new things that we couldn't get at this point. You can also pick your stick back up by pressing and holding C. So that's the first tip with the stick. There's more of those stick tips to come. And now for big head mode. Big head mode is useful in a number of ways, not just amusing as you've seen already, but it can also be handy. And this is actually a setting in the game that's really easy to turn on. Obviously this may change in the future with various different patches, but if you click on gameplay, at the bottom you'll see there's big head mode in the bottom of the options here. So turning this on essentially just gives everybody a big head, which is pretty hilarious, but actually I've found that it can be quite useful, as you'll see in a second, because it makes it easier to identify enemies. But you can see it also has an impact not only on Kelvin, but other things in the surrounding environment as well. So, for example, this could be useful to make it easier if you're having trouble finding food, because I've seen that the squirrels, the rabbits, and the deers all have big heads as well. It obviously makes the game look a little bit daft, but it's also pretty interesting because it highlights where creatures are if you're getting a bit hungry. And also, if you're in a dark cave, you can see the mutants a bit more easily as well, although it does have the downside of making them look perhaps a little bit more terrifying, especially the mutant babies, which also have big heads. So that's something to bear in mind. It's pretty entertaining stuff. The next tip is a pretty simple one, but not really that obvious. If you go to a camp and you find radios and laptops, if you smash them, you can get some circuit boards out of them. Circuit boards can be used for crafting various things like tech armor and time bombs, so it's worth just boshing those up whenever you see them. The next tip is actually for another stick tip. So this is another one which will help if you've got a stick. What you need to do is basically place a log down on the floor and then put a stick underneath it to raise it up. And then if you just walk into the log and knock it over, suddenly you've now got two logs. You do have to watch out for Kelvin though, because he does like to get in the way. And when he gets in the way, he might then get hurt by it. But basically, you're just sticking a stick under there, knocking a log over, and now you've got two logs, so you're duplicating logs. Now, obviously, they might patch this out at some point, but at the moment, this is a good way to quickly duplicate logs without having to chop down trees. Although it's worth noting that actually using an axe and chopping down a tree does build up your strength, which in turn can help with melee combat, so it is worth doing that as well. The next one is another thing that they've patched into the game, which is basically you can assign now a quick actions button to various things. So if you open up your inventory and then hover over an item, you can now press a number key, so 1, 2, 3, 4 for example, and assign that to a quick button. So now what we can do is basically assign axe to 1, for example, and other things. But you can see you can also put meds on there as well, so you can quickly pull out meds and weapons with ease, and you can do all that really quickly. You can also obviously right click on the backpack, and that'll auto pack it with things that are useful. So you can see it's put a spear in there, rock, the axe, the meds, the grenades. They're all in there now. And then what you can do is just press and hold I instead of tapping it, and it'll bring out the backpack instead of your main inventory. And then you can quickly access things from there. So you've got a couple of different ways to access your tools now. The next one is if you find a camp. So if you found a camp or some useful place where there's a lot of different loot that's spawned in containers, this can really be worthwhile. Keep an eye out for. You'll find them obviously on the GPS locator. It'll let you know with little icons. But if you come across a camp that has loads of stuff like this one does, obviously you can loot all this stuff. But then what you can do is you can also make it come back. So basically what we need to do is loot the whole area and then to save the game. So you want to save the game, make sure it's saved, and then basically to reload it. So when you go about the process of reloading the game, it will then obviously force respawn everything that was in that area, and then what you can do is you can basically then recollect it all again, and you've got duplicates then of everything that's in that area. Obviously, if there's a lot of useful loot in there, you can repeat this process over and over and then get more and more of that useful loot until your inventory's full. Obviously, it's probably best to do this in single player mode, because if you're hosting on a multiplayer, you're then going to collapse the server and you'll have to start it up again. So you can see here, though, that I've duplicated everything by just quickly reloading it, and then you can obviously access all this again. Now, again, they might patch this out, but at the moment it does work. If there isn't a tent where you can save there, not to worry, because you can obviously use a tarp. Now, you probably know how to do this because it's one of the earliest things, but you can basically put a tarp down, stick a stick underneath it, and then you can use that to save. So you can create a save point basically anywhere you are in the world in order to do this duplication thing. So basically just do that and then save. And once you've saved, then you can quit and reload again, and then you'll get that gear back. Another thing, though, is that you can take the tarp away with you, so you don't have to lose this tent. And it's not immediately obvious, but if you go to it and then just press and hold C, you can knock it down, and then you can recollect your stick and your tarp for use later on. So that can be pretty handy. So now a warning about the stick trick that I showed you earlier on. So the stick trick can be used to get into various different places you shouldn't be able to get into. The problem here is if you do this too soon, you might not have the weapons and things that you need. So you can see that I've gone through a door here, and there's absolutely loads of mutants down the end of that corridor. I don't have a gun at this point or anything really useful, but what I do have is the ability to build a time bomb. So although I've got one already, I'm building an extra time bomb. Going to use that to chuck at the mutants and get rid of them. Obviously, killing the mutants then has the benefit that you can then get the creepy armor off of them, so you can then use that to reinforce yourself. But this is one of the dangers, obviously, of cheesing your way through the game, using the sticks to cheat, basically, is that you might end up in a place which is ever so slightly more dangerous than you're meant to be in, but it is still a handy way to get access to things if you want them sooner. The other problem is that you can actually break the game by doing it. So this is another thing to watch out for. Try not to go through doors that you obviously shouldn't be able to get through, because you can see here that I've managed to clip my way out of the map. And this is obviously going to be problematic now because I can't get back through very easily, because you can see I can't even put a stick on the other side of the door, and then I fall through into the bottom. This actually became a problem because there's no way to then do anything about it. I ended up being stuck here underwater and not being able to get back to my friend. I was hosting a multiplayer game, so if I exit the game to reload it, I'm then obviously just going to disconnect him as well, which is an annoyance. So just watch out for that, because you can't force respawn and there's no way to die underneath the ground either. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing is, if you've spawned up here where the fresh water is, you found that baton, and this is a pretty common spawn point. There's an interesting highlight here that if you watch out for that baton and go back to it, what you'll find is there's lots of creatures that seem to go over there for some reason. I noticed that squirrels and birds seem to climb up where the baton was, but because the baton's been taken away, it still thinks it's there. The game still thinks it's there for some reason. So the squirrels and creatures climb up on top of it, they get electrocuted and end up falling down. So you can then get yourself some free food, essentially, because all you need to do is go over here and then basically skin them. The other thing I found is, because there's birds there, you can then smash the birds with your melee weapon, and then you'll get feathers flying up in the air that you can grab hold of. So you can basically get meat and feathers from this location where the baton has been. So that's pretty useful. So just get yourself a nice cattle prod, and then the imaginary invisible cattle prod is then producing a reasonably good source of food and feathers for you on a really quick basis. My final tip is for chopping things down. You might not realize that once you've chopped a tree down, you can also get rid of the trunk by just pressing and holding your melee attack button, and it'll do a strike from above to chop that down. This has been the Baroque Brawn. Check out the rest of the tips linked in the playlist below.